So, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to Yasmin. Thank you for joining us for the ETUI organized event for the SEER journals. Around the last issue of the SEER journal that we had the topic of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the future of the region, the legacy of the Dayton Peace Agreement. And given that this issue is very important, not only for Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also for the entire region, for the European integration perspective of the whole region. And there are events coming up now, so the Slovenian presidency, the potential change of the High Commissioner, that also make this issue highly relevant. So this is why we sought to devote a discussion to this, involving the most important authors of our last issue, and also the current issue that is under publication right now. So the whole journal is about generating debate in the region itself, and within also in the European context. Mostly we always had labor and social issues. This is also the title of the journal, and also the ETUI, the institute that is actually publishing this journal. We have labor and social issues in the foreground, and this is why, of course, the overall political context and the constitutional context and political context is extremely important, because it is determining to a large extent what happens in the economy and then labor and social context. What we see, and we will see with the presentations here, that since this overall political and constitutional context is in the limbo, the social and employment parts, there are burning issues in the region, are just off the table. They are just, nobody cares about it, because these are the issues that are these unresolved issues are taking the place and energy. And this is not only a problem in the political sense and in the sense of the stability of the region, and also the European repercussions of that, but for the particular labor and social issues. So by this, I just pass the word to Peter Scherer, who has been Deputy General Secretary at the ETUC and is a member of the editorial board of SEER. He will moderate. So Peter, I pass the word to you, and then.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So thanks a lot, Bela, for the introduction, and thanks a lot, for giving me the pleasure to be the facilitator today. And since we do have not that much time, and we have pretty competent speakers, 3 speakers, which I welcome very much. Thanks that you all appeared on the screen, and Yasmin, for him, it's pretty early, 7 o'clock in California. Thanks for joining us at this early time. I don't want to make too long speeches before we start. The concept is that we do have the 3 speakers in one go, but after the first speaker, Yasmin, and the second speaker, Jelko, then we have Christoph, and between each speakers, we would have the possibilities to have clarification questions and questions of the nature of there's something, maybe there's a misunderstanding. And we do have foreseen that all the participants can use the question and answer button at the bottom here on the screen to send the questions. And we have a big comfort. We have interpretation from English. Yeah, and actually I must say the language, we always said, I was in the 90s or in the 90s often in former Yugoslavia and was active in the trade union movement. And we said then, how do we call the language? And we said, oh, Dayton language. So we have translation into, or interpretation into Dayton language. So if you want to make use of that, click I think there's a little globe, and there you can choose between Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, Serbian, and English. Yeah. And now I would simply say, I hope that the participants have all read our issue about the 25 years of Dayton Agreement, and then you know already some of the positions of our three speakers. And I want to start rather quickly and straightforward now. I want to give the floor to Jasmin Mujanovic. He's a writer, he's a political scientist, and pretty active in many fields. And simply, yeah, I hand over now. And just to put it in one sentence, you are pretty critical about Dayton. And Dayton, you see Dayton as the continuation of the politics which have destroyed former Yugoslavia. And so you have the floor, and I will make myself heard shortly before 15 minutes are over. So it's now 16:11 16:11. Please go ahead, and thanks again for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me and for putting together this issue. I think it is very, very important, and I also commend all of my colleagues who also had very valuable contributions in this volume. I would encourage that everyone go ahead and read the texts. I'm pretty OCD, as they say, about time, so I don't think I'll go over time, but by all means do zap me if I happen to do so. I think, you know, I was just listening to these introductory comments, and I actually thought there was a lot of really interesting and useful stuff in there. You know, we might start with the fact that, for instance, Bosnia-Herzegovina's constitution, Annex 4 of the Dayton Peace Agreement, of course, has no local translation. So, for instance, while we have been at pains to decide what to call the mutually intelligible language that most of the region shares, with the exception of our Albanian cousins, and of course our good friends in Slovenia and Macedonia, you know, Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, we speak a mutually intelligible language. But in the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina, you know, despite the fact of references to the Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian languages, there is no translation of the Constitution into any of these local languages, and that's actually pretty significant. It's obviously not just significant from a kind of basic democratic accessibility standpoint. It also has all kinds of curious political ramifications. I found myself, for instance, in the curious position a couple of weeks ago where I was having a bit of a debate with one of the advisors to one of the presidents of Bosnia-Herzegovina, in this case, the Serb member of the state presidency of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Mr. Milorad Dodik at this point. And I found myself in the position of debating certain important aspects of the Constitution with his advisor. And this gentleman kept kind of coming back at me with the translation into BCS of the Constitution. And I kept having to point out to him that it was invalid because there is no translation. And it's not so much that you know, any of the things that he was saying were particularly wrong, but there was some important skews in the language that are significant when you're hashing out things like constitutional debates. Those of you who know your American jurisprudence will recall, of course, that, where the comma in the Second Amendment of the US Constitution is vis-a-vis the right to bear arms is a very, very important question, and no less so for Bosnia-Herzegovina. That having been said, though, I think the bigger issue is, when we think about Bosnia as a constitutional regime, and to the kind of the argument that I make in the article about the notion of Dayton as a kind of continuation of the fragmentation that accompanied the dissolution of Yugoslavia. That is important, because there's a very curious contradiction about Dayton. And it's basically this. On the one hand, Dayton is without a doubt the most successful peace agreement in modern history, right? You keep in mind that in the context of the whole of the Yugoslav wars, so all of the wars that accompanied the dissolution of Yugoslavia, the war in Slovenia, the war in Croatia, the war in Bosnia, the Kosovo War, and then the oft-forgotten insurgency in Macedonia, which took us all the way into 2001. When you put all of those conflicts together, we're talking about somewhere between 140 and 150,000 people killed. Just over 100,000 of those were killed in Bosnia. And the majority of those came from one particular ethnic group. A disproportionate number of the victims, well over half the victims, came from the ethnic Bosniak community, most of those killed in the context of the Bosnian genocide. Right? So the extreme violence that accompanied specifically the Bosnian War makes Dayton a really remarkable accomplishment on the part of the United States and the broader international community. Because once Dayton was initiated, once it was activated, the violence stopped. Nearly tutto completo. There was some extremely minor acts of violence that came thereafter, but for instance, from the perspective of the international community, there was no peacekeepers that were killed in Bosnia. The famous line about peacekeeping in Bosnia-Herzegovina is that there was more UN peacekeepers killed in road accidents after the end of the Bosnian War than in in any kind of kinetic action, as it were. That's really significant. So in that sense, Dayton is arguably the most successful peace agreement in modern history from the basic perspective of ensuring peace. The problem, of course, is that Dayton wasn't just a peace agreement. It was also supposed to be a functional constitutional regime for Bosnia-Herzegovina. And of course, from that perspective, Bosnia is a sovereign state. It has an international character. It has all the relevant institutions of a state. It's all there on paper. But then from the practical exercise of lived democracy, politics, electoral legitimacy, et cetera, and of course, most of all, and what's really at issue in this journal, of course, the kind of the notion of socioeconomic outcomes for ordinary citizens. This, of course, is where Dayton has huge gaps. And the fundamental issue with Annex 4, with the Dayton Constitution, is twofold, right? On the one hand, it is and has remained fundamentally a peace agreement. Which is to say that it has remained a kind of a compact between warring factions. And it has not evolved to become what the constitution of any functional democratic regime really needs to be, which is a social contract, which is a compact between the citizens themselves. And this, of course, is a huge problem. And that issue kind of then takes two divergent paths. And ideally, in some future scenario, those two paths will converge once again, but for the time being, they have converged rather dramatically. And they are the following. One, from a purely kind of, shall we say, Weberian, Max Weber style analysis, the legal rational architecture of the Dayton Constitution is fundamentally in crisis, because the Constitution has reached the point now where there are so many outstanding, unimplemented challenges and decisions of both the Bosnian Constitutional Court and, very importantly, the European Court of Human Rights that have struck down virtually every load-bearing provision of the Bosnian Constitution and said, look, this is discriminatory. You can't have a constitution in the 21st century where someone who is Jewish or Roma or just identifies as Bosnian-Herzegovinian can't be the president or a member of the presidency of the country. This is discriminatory. This must be amended. You cannot have this kind of zero-sum binary linkage between ethnicity, territory, and representation. What are we going to do with our ethnic Serb constituents in the federation who can't elect the Serb member of the presidency, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, right? So when you're talking about Sejdić-Finci, when you're talking about Ljubić, when you're talking about Pilav, Zornić, Šlaku, et cetera, all of these major decisions, this is a categorical challenge to the Bosnian constitutional legal regime, okay? So this is from the standpoint of basic functionality, the fact that there are so many outstanding and unimplemented decisions against the Bosnian constitutional regime is a huge issue. Most of all, because when you take the substance of all of these decisions, when you really, put them in front of you and say, okay, what are all of these decisions saying? What they're fundamentally saying is that the kind of the raison d'etre of the Dayton Constitution, which is this kind of ethnic sectarian power sharing model, all of these decisions fundamentally gesture at the fact that it is incompatible with the actually existing acquis of both the European Union, but also more broadly, the entire architecture of international law as it concerns things like, the OSCE. Okay, so that's really important. That's really important for Bosnia-Herzegovina's European, but also Atlantic aspirations. And then finally, the kind of the last point to be made, and something that I focus on a lot in the context of the paper, is the notion of essentially popular legitimacy, right? And popular legitimacy has always been lacking, in Bosnia, realistically speaking. I would actually, to be honest with you, I would argue in most of the region. If we're really going to be talking about democratic legitimacy in the post-war Balkans, most every state in the region has some pretty fundamental popular legitimacy issues. And one very simple way to I think see that in practice is the propensity towards illiberal and authoritarian governance across the region. Actually existing practices of democracy in the Western Balkans still remain very underdeveloped, unfortunately, including in EU member states in the region, such as Croatia and Slovenia, right? The current prime minister of Slovenia is somebody who has essentially been a mainstay of Slovene politics since 1991. This is an issue. This is a major issue from the perspective of kind of democratic political legitimacy. In the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina specifically, though, the fundamental issue is that for the vast majority of the Bosnian public across all ethnic groups, there is an almost institutional barrier to realizing legitimate grievances with the nature of governance and specifically with socioeconomic outcomes. And the reason for that is that it's very difficult to organize politically and socially in Bosnia-Herzegovina along anything other than ethno-sectarian lines. So if you want to say, hey, we want to talk about the fact that, quarter century after the end of the war, we're still realistically talking about an unemployment rate that's somewhere between, 20 to 30%, depending on which statistics you want to use. Emigration is a huge problem. Youth have virtually no, socioeconomic prospects. Can we please talk about this? Can we please talk about actual governance issues? The kind of the institutional political response from the Bosnian establishment but also really the kind of the implicit response from the constitutional regime is, well, no, not really. Because this system is designed fundamentally to deliver one thing. And it's designed to deliver this sense of, ethno-sectarian power sharing / balance.
Right.
And when you look at the day-to-day discourse of Bosnian politics, what is it that Bosnian politicians are debating in parliament, in press conferences, in newspapers? What is the thing that they're pitching to their constituents? It isn't socioeconomic outcomes. It isn't development. It isn't labor rights, et cetera, et cetera. It is these kind of classic ethno-sectarian hobby horses. And of course, the irony is that, and this is kind of the last point that I'll make, the irony is that by having this model, by having a model where citizens have virtually no avenues for demanding accountability, demanding change, even these ethno-sectarian issues can't be resolved. Because fundamentally what Dayton has prevented is the entry into the system of new ideas, right? There are ways that you could address various kinds of dimensions of the kind of ethno-national problematique of the Bosnian state. There are things that could be debated, innovations that could be implemented, but they're very, very difficult to do because Dayton is designed in such a way and the Constitution is designed in such a way that it privileges to an almost absurd extent the existing kind of nationalist oligarchy, which is proven to be remarkably unsusceptible to both democratic accountability in the form of elections, but also democratic accountability in the form of protests, unfortunately. And that's a much bigger issue, the protest aspect that perhaps we can debate in the Q&A. But that is what I would say for my time, and I will turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks a lot, Yasmin. That was really just very much in time and very precise. And I'm quite happy for your contribution that because I have some questions for that as well. But first, I asked the audience and all the participants and listeners whether they have a question. I already have written it down and asked in written for questions for clarification, but I can't see any. And if that is the case still up to now, then I would simply hand over. Jelko, I think you are already prepared, and with your contribution, I mean, that is, as a trade unionist, I simply say, yes, that is the contribution as a trade unionist we would like to see, that you're aiming for reforms and a permanent process of reforms, and everything flows pantarei, but Dayton Agreement is sort of, is in your, as I interpret it, is a hindrance, and so pantarei has to be lubricated by a democratic process, and you will give us now your point of view, and you as a lawyer, you might argue in a potentially a bit in a legal way, but in a very political way as well. Jelko, you have the floor now. Thanks for joining us.
Dobar dan svima, da li me čujete? Ok, meni je zadovoljstvo da mogu da učestvujem u ovoj raspravi. Moje bliže profesionalno određenje kao pravnika jeste da sam nastavnik, odnosno profesor univerziteta koji se bavi radnim i socijalnim pravom. I to je razlog što sam ja u mom tekstu Dejtonski sporazum i društvena reforma bavio se nekim drugim pitanjima, a ne ovim pitanjima o kojima je govorio uvaženi sugovornik kolega Jasmin. Ja sam ga pažljivo saslušao i moram reći da on ima drugačiji pristup, on naglašava neka politička pitanja ja neću o tome, ja sam spreman kada bude rasprava da učestvujem u raspravi, ali mislim da je dovoljno u jednoj rečenici da kažem da se sa mnogim stvarima koje on rekao ne slažem, a suštinski izvor neslaganja jeste što ja živim u Bosni i Hercegovini, a pogled nas koji živimo u Bosni i Hercegovini je drugačiji od pogleda onih koji žive van Bosne i Hercegovine. U mom tekstu Dejtonski sporazum i društvena reforma ja polazim od stava da Dejtonski sporazum počiva na pristupu da je potrebno uspostaviti samoodrživ sistem koji uvažava multinacionalnu i multikonfesionalnu strukturu stanovništva. To je bio polazni zadatak koji su pregovarači u Daytonu sebi postavili, da dođemo do mira, do suživota ili zajedničkog života na tom sistemu. Pa su onda napravljena dva entiteta, ne bih o tome govorio ako bude rasprave. Ono što treba povezati, želim da objasnim neke stvari što je govorio moj prethodnik, govoreći o nizu odluka Ustavnog suda Bosne i Hercegovine. Ja želim da kažem da u mom radu obrađujem odluku Ustavnog suda o konstitutivnosti naroda, riječ o Ustavnom sudu Bosne i Hercegovine, koja je donijeta 2000. godine i po kome je ta multinacionalna, po kome su entiteti pretvoreni u dva multietnička entiteta, u kome su konstitutivni narodi sva tri naroda u oba entiteta. Dakle, Ustavni sud Bosne i Hercegovine nije išao od negiranja principa konstitutivnosti, već je išao ka tome da taj princip konstitutivnosti naroda uspostavi u oba entiteta. Ne dakle samo na nivou Bosne i Hercegovine, institucija Bosne i Hercegovine što reguliše aneks 4, nego je to proširio na ustavne sisteme entiteta, tako da su uspostavljene institucije koje treba da garantuju da su sva tri naroda ravnopravna na teritoriju oba entiteta. Dakle, Ustavni sud Bosne i Hercegovine insistira na principu konstitutivnosti naroda Bosne i Hercegovine na cjelokupnoj teritoriji. Iza toga staje Kancelarija visokog predstavnika, ili ako hoćete bolje reći visoki predstavnik, i nameće neke entitete nameće neke ustavne amandmane na ustave entiteta sa ciljem da se ta odluka Ustavnog suda provede, zbog toga što nije bilo odgovarajuće političke podrške ni u jednom od entiteta da se ta odluka Ustavnog suda o konstitutivnosti ili ravnopravnosti naroda na teritoriju oba entiteta provede. I u stvari, ja ću vam pročitati mišljenje Evropske komisije za demokratiju kroz pravo, Venecijanske komisije iz 2005. godine, u kome stoji: pravila po kojima se najznačajnija mjesta ravnopravno dodjeljuju konstitutivnim narodima uvedena su u ustave entiteta i predstavnici tri naroda ustavno imaju jako blokirajuću poziciju u različitim jedinicama, čak i tamo gdje predstavljaju vrlo ograničen broj glasača. To je izjašnjavanje Venecijanske komisije o odluci Ustavnog suda Bosne i Hercegovine, ja sam citirao. Dakle, kada se govori o presudi Sejdić-Finci, koju je pomenuo uvaženi kolega Jasmin, ta presuda nije odluka Ustavnog suda u Strasburu, nije u skladu sa odlukom Ustavnog suda Bosne i Hercegovine. One se sukobljavaju. Pažljivo pročitajte, pa ćete vidjeti. Da vam kažem, prema Ustavu Republike Srpske prije ustavnih amandmana, Republika Srpska imala jednog predsjednika i jednog potpredsjednika. Nije uopšte bila određena nacionalna pripadnost ni predsjednika ni potpredsjednika, već su svi mogli da se slobodno kandiduju i da budu birani zavisno od volje birača. Poslije odluke Ustavnog suda BiH iz 2000. godine o konstitutivnosti ili ravnopravnosti naroda, mi smo došli u poziciju da je ta odredba Ustava Republike Srpske proglašena neustavnom, da je u sukobu sa odlukom Ustavnog suda i od strane visokog predstavnika na insistiranje stranih ambasada koje stoje iza Dejtonskog sporazuma je promijenjen, uveden je ustavni amandman kojim je rečeno da Republika Srpska ima predsjednika i 2 potpredsjednika, a oni ne mogu biti iz reda konstitutivnih naroda. Dakle, nije baš priča toliko jednostavno i postavlja se u stvari da kako se primjenjivao Dejtonski sporazum od strane oficijalnih institucija Bosne i Hercegovine. Da je ovdje u pitanju međunarodni pristup, vrlo je jednostavno objasniti, jer je ta odluka Ustavnog suda Bosne i Hercegovine o konstitutivnosti naroda iz 2000. godine, koja je, ponavljam, provedena uz pritisak OHR-a i visokog predstavnika i ambasada, donijeta na način da su tu odluku podržala 3 sudija iz reda bošnjačkog naroda, 2 sudija iz reda bošnjačkog naroda, izvinjavam se, 3 stranih sudija, dok su sudije iz reda hrvatskog i iz reda srpskog naroda preglasani. Znači, uopšte sam način da preglasavate sudije koje pripadaju konstitutivnom narodu ukazuje da je sporna konstitutivnost iz tog ugla i istovremeno se ta konstitutivnost proširuje na teritorije entiteta, s tim što mogu reći da u nekim kantonima u Federaciji Bosne i Hercegovine, ako je na to mislio kolega Jasmin potpuno u pravu, odluka o konstitutivnosti naroda nije provedena, pa imate nekoliko kantona u Federaciji Bosne i Hercegovine gdje nije utvrđena konstitutivnost srpskog naroda. I to je još uvijek pitanje o kome se vodi debata u institucijama Bosne i Hercegovine. Što se tiče aneksa 4, ja u mojoj analizi polazim od toga da nije određen rok za implementaciju ustavnih odredbi iz aneksa 4, kao što u samom sporazumu nije određen ni rok za implementaciju sporazuma. Dakle, nigdje tog roka nema. I zašto nema? Zato što vrijeme za primjenu ustavnih normi u multinacionalnoj, suverenoj, demokratskoj zemlji, kako je Bosna i Hercegovina definisana u Dejtonskom sporazumu, se ne može unaprijed predvidjeti. Mi imamo jednu stalnu raspravu, i tu se slažem sa kolegom Jasminom, da se od 1995. godine od primjene Dejtonskog sporazuma vodi rasprava o Ustavu Bosne i Hercegovine sa različitih aspekata i nacionalnih, i entitetskih, i političkih, i partijskih. Jedan veliki broj različitih mišljenja koje je veoma teško uvezati u neku cjelinu. Ono što je po meni važno, što sam napisao o radu, jeste sljedeće. Da nedostatak niza rasprava o pitanjima koja se odnose na organizaciju i postupak odlučivanja institucijama vlasti je u tome što se skreće pažnja sa rasprave o tome kako ispuniti kriterijume za prijem Bosne i Hercegovine u Europsku uniju. Naime, mi se neprestano vrtimo u krugu i u institucijama BiH i u javnosti sa raspravom o Ustavu, aneksu 4, pritom je potpuno marginalizovano pitanje kako ispuniti uslove za prijem Bosne i Hercegovine u Europsku uniju. Da je to tačno, pokazuje činjenica da je od zemalja na području takozvanog Zapadnog Balkana, tako je naziv koji se koristi od strane službeni naziv koji se koristi u papirima, odnosno dokumentima Evropske unije, premda ne može biti po meni geografski tačan, ali nije važno. Dakle, što se mi, mjesto da se bavimo kako ispuniti uslove da uđemo u Evropsku uniju, bavimo ovim pitanjima, marginalizujemo to pitanje evropske integracije i kao dokaz, ponavljam, je činjenica da Bosna i Hercegovina među tim zemljama, ajmo reći, Zapadnog Balkana je jedina zemlja koja još nije kandidat za prijem, već ima status potencijalnog kandidata. Zašto je to tako? Vrlo jednostavno. Zato što se institucije Bosne i Hercegovine, neću govoriti o institucijama entiteta jer to nije priča o Dejtonskom sporazumu, institucije u entitetima nisu predmet aneksa 4, nego institucije Bosne i Hercegovine, umjesto da se bave životnim pitanjima građana, zapošljavanjem, kako da zaustave ovaj odliv mladih ljudi u zapadnu Evropu, u Ameriku, u Kanadu, bave jalovom, praznom političkom pričom. Nama je dosta, građanima u Bosni i Hercegovini, bez obzira kom narodu i kom entitetu pripadali, je dosta te jalove priče, pogotovo jalove priče od strane ljudi koji ne žive u Bosni i Hercegovini. Pustite nas koji živimo u Bosni i Hercegovini da se sami dogovorimo, da izaberemo naše političke predstavnike, jer mi smo u stvari ti koji imamo interes, životni interes, pošto tu živimo, da se postigne sporazum. Da nije bilo intervencije OHR-a i međunarodne zajednice, ja sam uvjeren da bi se građani i narod u Bosni i Hercegovini oko mnogo čega dogovorili. Zašto? Zato što mi imamo interes da se dogovorimo, da imamo bolji životni standard, da imamo zapošljavanje, da smo korak bliže Evropskoj uniji, a ne da vodimo puku debatu o tome šta uraditi poslije 25 i 6 godina, a ne možemo da pratimo, ali ne u tempo, nemamo dinamiku drugih zemalja Zapadnog Balkana. Sljedeće, Dejtonski sporazum se primjenjuje i ne može se reći da u Bosni i Hercegovini nije napravljen rezultat. Rezultat je ogroman. Obezbeđena je sloboda kretanja ljudi, robe, kapitala. Vi možete da se krećete slobodno po Bosni i Hercegovini, da putujete u bilo koje mjesto Bosne i Hercegovine. Ja sam svjedok, ja mogu da svjedočim da nikada od Dejtonskog sporazuma pa na ovamo nisam imao nijedan incident. Nigdje me nisu pitali za ime i prezime, nisu me pitali kom narodu pripadam. Imao sam potpunu slobodu kretanja i potpunu sigurnost. To je veliki domet koji moramo da zahvalimo zemljama koje su stali iza Dejtonskog sporazuma i omogućile nam da normalizujemo život. Naš je problem što mi to ne znamo da uradimo. To je naš problem. Ne možemo očekivati da neko drugi rješava naše ekonomske i socijalne probleme, već to moraju naše institucije vlasti. Ja ću iznijeti, dakle, nasuprot ideji koja se često pominje u medijima od strane političara koji su mnogi već decenijama na političkoj sceni i stalno ponavljaju istu priču kao papagaj. Ja ću reći, dakle, nasuprot ideji da je kandidatura za prijem u Evropsku uniju važna za rješavanje unutrašnjih odnosa i ustavno preuređenje, može se navesti činjenica da dejtonsko uređenje funkcioniše decenijama i da razvoj zemlje prati razvoj drugih zemalja u regionu Zapadnog Balkana. Nisu oni nama puno otišli, čak mogu reći da smo mi od nekih od njih razvijeni, imamo i veće plate i veća primanja i bolje živimo. Uklapanje u evropske standarde se čini neprekidno od Dejtona, a to pokazuje da se Dejtonski sporazum dograđuje i da je takozvana evropska ili briselska faza samo logičan nastavak. Dejtonska i briselska faza ne protivriječe jedna drugoj i ja polazim od činjenice da aneks 4 nije kočnica za razvoj, ekonomski i socijalni razvoj Bosne i Hercegovine i integraciju Bosne i Hercegovine u Evropsku uniju. Pošto je vrijeme ograničeno, ja neću puno izlagati, samo ću se vratiti na ono što je po meni najvažnije, a to je reformski put Bosne i Hercegovine. Dakle, aneks 4 Dejtonskog sporazuma predstavlja ustavni osnov za provođenje reformi i okvir za saradnju i koordinaciju institucija vlasti u procesu stabilizacije i pridruživanja, u kome se traže reforme u oblasti ekonomije, prava i socijalne politike. I ono što kasni, to su te reforme. Kasni zato što nema spremnosti nosilaca institucija vlasti da ih provode. Izbjegavaju da ih provode, jer time mogu dovesti u pitanje očuvanje svoje vlasti. A opozicija, umjesto da se obavi tim pitanjima, da otvara pitanja, opozicija otvara neka druga pitanja, opet nacionalna, politička, istorijska i tako dalje. Dakle, nije problem u sistemu, već je problem u političkoj organizaciji i životu i sposobnosti da se izađe iz lošeg nasljeđa. Dakle, u pitanju je dug proces u kome učestvuju institucije vlasti na raznim nivoima, a prema dogovorenom mehanizmu koordinacije. Ali ta pitanja ne privlače toliko pažnju stručne javnosti kao pitanje o odredbi o zaštiti interesa i entiteta u institucijama Bosne i Hercegovine, iako evropski put prvenstveno zavisi od kvaliteta i brzine provođenja reformi. U isto vrijeme ankete pokazuju da većina građana podržava učešće zemlje u procesu evropske integracije, što vodi uspostavljanju društva u kome se poštuju pluralizam, nediskriminacija, tolerancija, pravda i solidarnost, a to su, kao što znate, zahtjevi Evropske unije. Usklađivanje, ja ću samo reći za usklađivanje radnog zakonodavstva. Ukratko, pošto je prošlo 15 minuta, završavam. Bosna i Hercegovina, mogu dati u raspravi ako bude bilo potrebe ili možete pročitati tekst. Bosna i Hercegovina je definisana Dejtonskim sporazumom kao suverena i demokratska zemlja, te su promjene ustavnih odredbi dopuštene u demokratskom postupku u suštini na način da se poštuje politička volja i naroda i građana. U prilog tome može se navesti da u skladu s članom 49 ugovora Evropskoj uniji zahtjev za članstvo može podnijeti evropska zemlja koja poštuje demokratske vrijednosti Unije. Ja se izvinjam što sam pokušao da kažem nešto više, nije bilo vremena. Hvala vam na pažnji i spreman sam da na sva pitanja učestvujem, da otvorimo svaku moguću polemiku oko svakog pitanja. Ja bih više govorio o aneksu 4 nego oko političkih pitanja, ali ako želite možemo o tome. Hvala na pažnji.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jerko. That was pretty comprehensive, and you touched up on many issues. And I myself would have some questions, but of course, our participants and our listeners, they should they started already to point some questions in the chat, and Yasmin got already a question, and I would like to encourage all the ones who listen to do that. And now I want to hand over the floor to Christoph. Christoph, as a professor from Geneva, please, you have the long-standing experience, and you're working for many years on the issue we discuss here, and please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for this event and for inviting me also. I will try to make a long story short. It's not easy. Just one point before I start, referring to the paper published by the review, I will move beyond. I try to improve it a little bit, and also to speak specifically on Bosnia-Herzegovina. And therefore, there is for today a paper, and I will, in my presentation now, just bring the main points in order to save time and to fit in the time slot I got. The first more general part is more regional European view, questioning the fate of Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And here I will mention three approaches. The first one is developed in the paper published in the review last year. And was developed by Attila Haag from Budapest, and it's based on a differentiated integration approach that present, in my view, a really relevant sequencing of post-war Europe, identifying three phases of systemic change. The first decade in the 90s, characterized by relative, moderate, if you want, democratization, and by consolidation at the same time, and relative integration, I would add. Second decade in the 2000s marked by partial deconsolidation, and the decades of the 2010s marked by absolute de-democratization and deconsolidation. And I speak here not so much of the former Yugoslav republics, but of Central European states as Hungary, for example, Poland, and so on. This is the first approach that I don't further discuss. It's well discussed, presented in my paper. Second approach is new, and it introduced a concept developed by Bertrand Badi, an French expert in international relations, but his expertise is related more to Africa. But I find there are some good ideas for our situation, if I may say so. And the second approach considers the deconvergence and deconsolidation and de-democratization as results of weakness politique as opposed to power politics. And this is the argumentation of Bertrand Badi. I cannot develop it right now, but that as for now, not only in Europe and considering the Balkans or East Central Europe. Weakness politic is taking the lead, and I would say this started already with the dissolution of Yugoslavia. That is a good example to illustrate the power of weakness politics. And the third approach is more related to my profession as being a philosopher. Third approach is formulated by Roberto Esposito, an Italian philosopher, and takes an even broader perspective and connecting community and immunity. And it views in this perspective the various illiberal tendencies as a symptom of the age of immunology. And I think this is quite interesting and relates also can be related also to the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example, but I will not develop this. For me, it's obvious. One basic argument of Esposito's view is that any community, could be a country, tolerates only a little small amount of the others. And then it combines immunology at political level and at medical level, and in the framework of a biopolitic framework, so to say, related to Foucault and so on and so on. And what I try to introduce in the book I wrote, Viva la Transition, is to connect concepts that are generally thought to be reconcilable, excluding or opposing each other. For example, instead of opposing democratization and de-democratization, we may observe recapturing here the concept of complementarity, or the idea developed by Donna Haraway, staying with the trouble, that both democratization and de-democratization are continuous and interconnected processes related to democracy. By the way, just a footnote here, Charles Tilley is one who did investigate research in this field, and it's quite interesting and softening a little bit the, let's say, the issue when we speak about illiberal countries or tendencies or so on. And considering another polarization between community and immunity, also this opposition is in a way an error. It's leading nowhere. Both notions should be related, connected. They are just two distinct sides of the same entity. Could be a person or a community or a country who are both immune and also common. So there is something that connects in a way different the different levels, different spheres, so to say. And this brings me to speak about the age of transition as the, let's say, something typical for the 21st century, advocating for a culture able to capture the paradoxes of the ongoing multiple transition process, not only in former Yugoslavia or in East Central Europe, also in Europe and elsewhere. We face transition processes, of course, related to the ecological issues, the Anthropocene, for example. And we are facing systematically oscillating phenomena back and forth between regional and national level, between formality and informality, between consolidation and deconsolidation, and democratization and de-democratization, and so on. So we need to change software. This is one point. The problem was not Dayton, was after. What comes after? How to change, how to evolve, and you need to change software. Or software on the computers are updating on daily basis automatically. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen in the field of international relations or in the field of politics. So we need what I call a multiplex approach, focusing on new trends, I come immediately to that, not to the map, polymorphous rather than unidimensional. Another trend is we are facing tendencies who are more flux and less form, less structured, so more dynamic, and that are driven more by autonomy and less by control. And we have to live, to understand this, and to move in that direction. Now, coming to Bosnia, I try to make it short and to develop a little bit more this section on Bosnia, where I try to bring a little bit new pictures, new ideas in order to see the country in a different way. Therefore, the pictures, the map are important. And I try to overcome the Bosnian map. I start with the malaise, uneasiness, the Freudian word in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is still there, not only in the field, but also in Europe. We don't really know how to deal with that. And of course, this malaise was heavily reloaded in April 2021 with the so-called Slovenian non-paper advocating a peaceful solution of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this illustrates, but also the fact that no solution was until now found, nor by the international community and nor by the locals, even if I would say there were many quite interesting projects to go beyond Dayton, formulated by local people, yeah. This mess, so to say, illustrates the omnipotence of three key, but in my view, completely outdated norms of the Westphalian software, of the Westphalian concept. Sovereignty, territoriality, and international negotiations are completely outdated or should be completely reframed. So what else? This is a question. What else away from a Eurocentric perspective, away from the outdated Westphalian model, away from traditional geopolitics, we faced, away from these outdated models and softwares, we faced a multiplex world order made by more complex and more fluid political finalities that move definitely beyond the state-centered understanding of power and territory. And of course, when we formulate the question of Dayton, we are in a way in a trap. We fall in a trap because we are not going outside of the box, you know, and so there is no solution in the box. Out of the box, there is a solution because we have to face, to include multi-actor, multi-level, multi-scalar processes. And I want a little bit to give an idea of it, and because it matters to depart from state-centered approaches in order to incorporate the often neglected micro-politics, including regional, urban, and the network levels. What I'm speaking about, what I'm referring to, I would like to speak about the cities, about the urban level, but I will speak more exclusively actually about the regional level. And here, you can switch to map 2. We have first going back to the history, and it relates also to the region. I mentioned the Alpe Adria, for example, a network, a cooperation forum, and other cross-border working communities that are belonging to this, let's say, trend beyond the state-centered level. And all the Interreg programs from the European Union that are involving national, regional, and local actors since the 90s in different strands of cooperation, cross-border, transnational, interregional, which matters not only in former Yugoslavia, but also elsewhere in Switzerland, Germany, and so on. One of the most successful regional cross-border story is the Regio Basileus, which connects France and Germany and Switzerland. And these EU programs include all former Yugoslav republics as part of the instruments for the pre-accession assistance, and also, this is very, very important, EU non-members countries in the east and in the south in the framework of the European neighborhood policy. And this is illustrated by the map 7 and 8. If we can just switch speedily, this shows the EPA program, yes, that involves, and they are often not acknowledged. They exist, they brings money and not only money. And this is another, let's say, it gives another picture of Europe and of the region. And where I want to dig a little bit more in this direction, I want to introduce the notion of bioregions. And I can switch to map 10. The next one, yeah, it comes later on. Next one, yeah, bioregion. What is nice, you don't see any borders here, no borders. And where is your country? Where is Bosnia? You see another, you have another picture, let's say, of the region. So bioregion understood as a unique region, definable by natural rather than by political boundaries, with a geographic, climatic, hydrological, ecological character, and so on, supporting human and non-human living communities. This river basin map presents East Central Europe and the Balkans together connected. And note, I would add here one comment going a little bit to San Francisco, to the Bay Area, mentioning Peter Berg, founder of the Diggers in the 60s, and later on of the Planet Drum Foundation, a bioregionalism network still existing and still active, who coined a very nice alternative to the concept of bioregion, introducing the term of life place. What we need are life places. How can this apply to Bosnia? We can here take map 12. This approach fits to, and the next one already, yes, this one, yes, map 12 is right. We can see here other borders, and it's not a Dayton map, it's another map. And you see here 8 regions or so, 8 different river basins, 6 of them belonging to the cross-border Sava river basin. And here, note, many people are not informed about, but bioregional approach may eventually lead to the foundation of a river basin organization. And as a matter of fact, the International Sava River Basin Organization exists. It was established in 2004. And in 2006, it opened its permanent secretariat in Zagreb. And this story doesn't end here. People in Bosnia know very well, not only before 2014, there was also massive devastating flood in Bosnia. And by then, 2014, first flood risk maps were established. And then we had various disaster risk reduction projects that were initiated under the umbrella of the European Union, various intergovernmental agencies as UNESCO, UNDP, and so on, following in a way the dynamic of this map you see there.
Christoph,
yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but can you please round up, because you
had... I will so.
Yeah, no, you don't have to, but round up with 1 or 2 sentences and let us have the possibility to discuss.
Yeah. So what is interesting is that you have other maps following, let's say, the same trend who show a different country. And of course, I come back to the question, it's a way to round up, as you asked me. of course, it remains open if these regions, bioregions, could eventually, over time, replace the dysfunctional entities established in the framework of the Dayton Agreement. But this is not my point. My point is a different one. I have to insist that the very idea of multi-level and multi-scalar processes, instead of establishing a hierarchy, combining is in a way devoted to combine the various structures, various levels. So I think, as in other countries, you can very well have different layers, different divisions, so to say. But the bioregional approach would present something more functional that could progressively, step by step, let's say, push, delete, so to say, the Dayton map, focusing on the necessity of let's say, of the reality. And well, I will stop here. The idea was only to present something a little bit new, not so well known, that maybe can open other perspectives that could be interesting. So,
thanks a lot, Christoph. A big thank you. And now we have the screen back again. Yeah, fine. And well, I asked for some questions, and I encouraged members of the editorial board. Bruno Sergi is in our round, and I encouraged all participants and listeners to place some questions. And we got a question directed clearly to Yasmin. And please, I would now immediately say, Yasmin, go ahead with that. And then I would encourage everybody to put some questions here at these question and answer section or the chat. And please, Yasmin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So I see the question in the chat that I will address. I wanted to just very quickly also address just, I think, a few comments that were directed towards me by Professor Mirjanic, just as a small, let's say, personal point, given that the professor started his commentary by mentioning something to the effect of those of us who live here in Bosnia-Herzegovina. With all due respect, I was born in Sarajevo. I have Bosnian citizenship. Naš jezik je moj materni jezik, ako je to je potrebno da kažem. I pay taxes to the Bosnian-Herzegovinian state. I own property in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I have just as much legal and political right to be involved in the politics of my mother country, especially given the fact that the reason why I don't live in Bosnia has to do with the events of the 90s. So let's just kind of put that there. The other kind of major point that I do agree with the professor on, though, however, is this idea that we do require more dialogue among the citizens of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and I absolutely agree with that. The thing that I take issue with and that doesn't really follow in his analysis, however, is this idea that the presence of the international community has somehow compromised or undermined the possibilities for dialogue, especially given that the professor himself advocates for European reforms within Bosnia-Herzegovina. I don't see what exactly the international community has prevented. It's not the international community that has encouraged certain important actors in Bosnia-Herzegovina to threaten secession on a near daily basis. It's not the international community that has encouraged certain political actors to negate and deny crimes against humanity and the genocide in Bosnia-Herzegovina on a near daily basis. If the relevant political actors in Bosnia-Herzegovina wanted to come to some kind of agreement, in fact, the international presence there would accommodate that and make that easier. So I'm not entirely sure what exactly the international community has prevented in that sense. To the question that was posed by a colleague in the chat, my sort of take on the recent elections in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Look, I think there was some reasons to be cautiously optimistic about certain positive developments in the country. I mean, I kind of generally take the position that anything that sort of dilutes and undermines the political power of the three big political parties in the country, the SDA, the HDZ, and the SNSD, is good for Bosnia. And that includes, for instance, the mayor that was elected in the city of Banja Luka, somebody who's, a lot of his political stances I don't agree with. I think they're quite problematic. But I do think it's positive that he was elected because he represents a fresh option and the possibility in that municipality and Bosnia-Herzegovina more broadly to just strike out a new path and have new actors engaging in dialogue, for the same reason that I think it's positive that very similar things happened in and around the greater Sarajevo area, where essentially the SDA party was completely electorally decimated. I think that's good. I think it's good that the HDZ has begun to lose some of its power in its heartland in Western Herzegovina. Again, I think that opens avenues for dialogue. The kind of the structural problem is that the electoral regime, the Dayton electoral regime in Bosnia is such that again, non-nationalist parties in particular have a very, very hard path towards power. And there's all kinds of institutional barriers in place, even when they do win power, right? You have classic examples of, the nationalist parties basically saying that unless you are a member of their party, even if you identify as whatever, Croat, Serb, Bosniak, whatever the case may be, as long as if you're not a member of their nationalist parties, you don't actually get to exercise that identity. So you don't get to be, for instance, a Serb who is not a member of the SNSD and might actually be with what we call a kind of pro-Bosnian party, or you don't get to be a Bosniak who is a member of a civic liberal party and rejects the SDA, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the categorical problem. I see also very quickly, there's one more question for me here that asks whether the Dayton Agreement put an end to the war while the EU showed inertia. How could the EU support reforms within the region? Is there more awareness of the need for the EU to do this? I think from a historical standpoint, from the perspective of kind of European international diplomacy, the 90s were a catastrophe. Europe did not act. It was the United States that ended the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. That's just a fact. Has the European Union improved its capacities in Bosnia-Herzegovina since then, in particular since Thessaloniki in 2003? To be honest with you, I'm not convinced. I think the EU as a foreign policy actor, not just in Bosnia, but the entire Balkans and its kind of entire neighborhood, has really struggled to demonstrate a coherent capacity to be a foreign policy actor. The fundamental problem for the EU in Bosnia-Herzegovina is that it has very limited capacities to incentivize, but also on the flip side, sanction or penalize bad faith actors, right? The EU can offer money to actors in the Balkans and say, hey, conditionality, right? It can engage in conditionality. If you do this, we will give you that. If you engage in reforms, we will give you funds, or we will even open the door to membership and membership eventually. But if you don't, ... And that's the fundamental problem in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And that's what I would kind of end on.
Thanks a lot, Yasmin. I see Christoph is raising his hand.
I would have a comment just to react to what was said, what Yasmin said now and also before. When speaking about, let's say, the lack of social contract and political will in Bosnia-Herzegovina to change the country, the constitution, this is, of course, a problem. But I would be less enthusiastic about the international community because I could, the front line, so to say, observe in 2005, by the time we organized with Capacities, Wolfgang Petric and many others from Bosnia, the international conference Dayton and beyond in Geneva, that there was absolutely no political will of the international community. Pandora box. Don't open the Pandora box. And so, of course, it's not helpful when you have both actors who are blocked. And I think this, but the problem is that by 2005, there was, in my view, a little window of opportunity to introduce some changes. And I spoke with different people, important people from Bosnia, entire Bosnia, from the Sava to the sea, not to mention the entities, and they were almost ready to find an agreement. But there was absolutely no, we speak about politics, there was no interest. I have it from different, I took part to meetings with different ambassadors who were the leading, let's say, ambassadors in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this is bloody. This is bloody. Because after, okay, with the project, but this is peanuts. We're speaking here about big politics, and weakness politics was in a way winning the post-war years, and at the expenses of the normal people. Let's speak about the other layers. You know, labor. What Bella mentioned before. You know, how are normal people living in Bosnia? What are the perspectives, you know? And there is a gap between the level we are speaking now about politics and so on, and the daily basis. And there is a responsibility not only by the local politicians that the situation is still messy, that there is corruption. It's also the responsibility of the European Union, and this is a shame. This is a shame, because the situation didn't change. Yes, you're right. The Dayton Agreement did bring peace, but it was absolutely unable to change, to evolve, and this was catastrophic. And some of the key peoples from the US realized that, but it was too late. For example, just one mention. One issue, and I will stop with this, I will end with this, that to name one entity, Republika Srpska, this was a completely failure. They recognized it, but too late. And we are paying for this. I mean, we, the people in the field. And I don't hope, I'm not hopeful when it comes to the international committee. But I think that I am convinced that in the field, so to say, in Bosnia, you have people who have ideas. Benjamina Karic, just to mention one name, and many others from the young generation who will bring a new input and who will bring the country a step further and will introduce change. Because change are important, and they will come from the bottom, from below, and not from above.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I see that Jelko has raised his hand. Yeah, and we have no other questions written here in the chat or in the F&A section, but I have a question. When Jelko now gets the floor, I have a question to him, because he said that we, or in a way, leave it to us, and we will develop and we will do something, and we will, the pantare, the everything is floating, but to be honest, in my view, I think it's a river which is not floating. Yeah, the river it's a still stand. And what Yasmin just said, that the international community or the European Union, that they give the space for it, but it's up to the people to do something. And when I see how Jelko put it, I'm really skeptical. I'm really skeptical that this, what Christoph just said, people have ideas. Yes, I know quite a few people in Bosnia-Herzegovina who have ideas, but I can't see the progress, the practical progress. I can't see that. And I would simply say, if the international community or the European community would see something where they really would work together and develop the region socially and economically, I think the European Union, they have a lot of deficits and a lot of things they are to blame for, but not that they are obstacles for development. So with this, I would like to give you the floor, Jelko.
Dobro, nadam se da se čujemo. Ja sam pokušao pažljivo da slušam i moram reći da sam smatrao da mi ne treba da vodimo političku raspravu. I odmah ću vam odgovoriti zašto. Mi smo intelektualci koji imamo sve razmišljanje. A političku raspravu treba da vode predstavnici naroda i građana koje oni izaberu na izborima. I to je ključni problem, ključna greška međunarodne zajednice. Naravno, šta nedostaje Bosni i Hercegovini? Ja se slažem sa vašim pitanjem i sa onim što sam čuo, to je, ako sam dobro razumio, da u Bosni i Hercegovini nedostaje unutrašnji dijalog. Da, Ustav Bosne i Hercegovine i Dejtonski sporazum je napisan i prihvaćen u američkoj vazduhoplovnoj bazi. Njega nisu donijeli predstavnici naroda u Skupštini, to je njegov osnovni nedostatak. Ali nema tog, ni Evropske unije, ni visokog predstavnika, ni diplomata, ni koga god hoćete, ni nas intelektualaca, koji možemo da zamijenimo predstavnike naroda i građana. Oni moraju u institucijama Bosne i Hercegovine otvoriti dijalog. Oni, a ne mi. Mi možemo da pričamo, ali mi ne možemo da promijenimo stvari. Oni moraju pričati, oni moraju voditi dijalog da bi se stvari promijenile. Ja mislim da je to elementarna suština. Žao mi je što je Jasmin moju primjedbu shvatio lično. Ne, to ni uopšte nema veze s vama, kolega Jasmin. Ja sam govorio o problemu Bosne i Hercegovine. Problem Bosne i Hercegovine ovog momenta ključni, a vezan za ekonomsko i socijalno stanje u Bosni i Hercegovini je sljedeći. Mladi ljudi iseljavaju iz Bosne i Hercegovine. Ne kao što je to bilo 1965. pa nadalje, kad je propala privredna reforma u bivšoj socijalističkoj federativnoj republici Jugoslaviji, pa je odlazio otac porodice na zapad, našao posao i svoj novac slao u Bosnu i Hercegovinu i Bosna i Hercegovina, odnosno tadašnja socijalistička Jugoslavija, je prije svega živjela od tih doznaka. To je bio najveći devizni priliv. Zaboravite to. Sad je činjenica, nažalost, tragična za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, da se mladi ljudi, kompletne porodice, iseljavaju u zapadne zemlje. Na taj način zapadne zemlje rješavaju svoja demografska pitanja. Šta nedostaje Evropskoj uniji? Ja nisam kompetentan da o tome govorim. Ja mogu reći moje mišljenje uz veliku ogradu da ne znam da li sam u pravu. U Evropskoj uniji danas, čini mi se, nema velikih lidera, ljudi koji imaju široke poglede, koji mogu da vode Evropsku uniju. Evropska unija se zapetljala u svoje unutrašnje probleme. Ona više ne pokazuje želju da prostor Zapadnog Balkana pokrije, da ga uključi. Ne može se to uključiti administrativnom odlukom. Treba je ogromne investicije da se taj prostor ekonomski i socijalno podigne da bi jednog dana mogao da uđe u Evropsku uniju. Ja sam imao ideju, ako budete pogledali moje radove i pratili još neposredno poslije Daytona i javno govorio o tome, zalagao se za sljedeće, da Evropska unija primi Bosnu i Hercegovinu u svoje članstvo, ne postavljajući pred nju zahtjev da ispuni uslove. Govorili su mi predstavnici Evropske unije da je to nemoguće. A ja vas postavljam pitanje, kako nemoguće, kad su neke druge zemlje preko noći primljene u Europsku uniju, a nisu ispunjavale uslove. Neću da govorim koje su to zemlje. Zašto Bosna i Hercegovina nije primljena? Da je Bosna i Hercegovina prije 20 godina primljena u Europsku uniju, ako ne ispunjava uslove, da je došlo do investicija, da je došlo do ukidanja granica o kojima je divno govorio kolega govoreći da te granice predstavljaju probleme, uvaženi profesor, ja vam tvrdim, danas bi situacija u Bosni i Hercegovini bila drugačija i to bi bila jedna evropska zemlja. Ne, Evropska unija je pasivno posmatrala šta se događa u Bosni i Hercegovini. Šta znači visoki predstavnik? On koči dijalog. Možete da mi kažete da on sprečava secesiju? Ja se ne slažem. O kojoj secesiji možemo govoriti u Bosni i Hercegovini kad nijedna okolna zemlja ne dovodi u pitanje integritet Bosne i Hercegovine? Znači, i završit ću, pokazujete mi znak i završit ću. Ono što nedostaje Bosni i Hercegovini je unutrašnji dijalog o zajedničkoj budućnosti. To je ključno pitanje, a u suštini toga su ekonomske i socijalne reforme, a ne pitanje o konstitutivnosti ili preglasavanju. To je pogrešan pristup koji nameću nam političari koji su došli na vlast 90. godine i već 3 decenije neuspješno od 90. godine pa na ovamo upravljaju Bosnom i Hercegovinom potpuno neuspješno.
Thank you very much, Jelko. Yasmin raised his hand already a while ago. Yasmin, didn't you? I thought you were raising your hand and.
No, I was not.
Okay.
But I'm happy to respond if you need me to.
Yeah, but I don't think I cannot see any further question from any of the colleagues or participants and listeners.
There is a question of some sort or comment that just came.
There is one more question came in. Well, it's not, it doesn't say who should answer. Do you see it?
No, the question is?
The question is, if Bosnia-Herzegovina, if BH politicians and thinkers continue dreaming that the EU will make some exceptions for just for them, this country will never go anywhere. No, BH will not be admitted in the European Union without fulfilling basic EU membership requirements, also because it would block the internal EU mechanism. Does anybody have an opinion, a short opinion to it? Because we have another 6 minutes to go.
I mean, I can just very quickly say just to that comment and I think to the analysis that Professor Mirinic had just a couple of moments ago, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I mean, obviously, in some ways, theoretically speaking, had Bosnia joined the EU earlier, maybe some things would be easier. But the reality is, A, that's not going to happen. I don't think it could have happened. And I think also this commentator is fundamentally right that the EU would not take Bosnia in, because I mean, you look at the problems that the EU has with somebody like Viktor Orban right now, or even the government in Poland, and then never mind adding Bosnia with its Dayton constitution to that mix. I think but I think the bigger issue for me personally speaking, and I know some of my European colleagues disagree with me, but I'm categorically convinced of this. Enlargement, the European Union enlargement program is over. There's not going to be any more enlargement, not in any kind of politically relevant standpoint, by which I mean in the next 10 to 15 years. It's not happening. And when we talk about politics and we speak of timelines like 10, 15 years, that means it's over. And that's part of the animating principle behind this emigration issue that also the Professor Mirinic eloquently noted, and he's absolutely right about the comparison to what was going on in the 60s and 70s in the SFRJ. People are leaving because people are going to the EU by themselves. They are acceding to EU membership by themselves because they're not going to wait for Bosnia or for even Serbia or Montenegro or Kosovo or North. It's not going to happen. And I think that from the perspective of the European Union is a much bigger issue than I think the EU at this moment recognizes, because it thinks that by preventing membership of these countries, it's solving its own problems with the far right and populism and blah, blah, blah. It's not, because the Western Balkans aren't going away. They're geographically there, and they will become more unstable as European Union presence withdraws. That's all.
Yasmin, with your last intervention, you already described the next workshop. Yeah, so that is certainly an issue, and that workshop is more than 90 minutes. And a lot of aspects, I think you are 100% right, but that is it's a separate issue. And I see that Jelko has his hands raised, but we have only 3 minutes left, and Bela as well. So Jelko, if you can make it in 1 minute, it would be very nice. And then Christoph 1 minute, and then Bela 1 minute.
Mogu. Ja sam govorio o tome da je Evropska unija trebala primiti Bosnu i Hercegovinu neposredno poslije rata, a ne govorimo o sadašnjoj situaciji. Potpuno se slažem s Jasminom da je Evropska unija zaustavila proces integracije i da je to najveći problem za zemlje Zapadnog Balkana. I baš zato što smo očekivali da će se ovo desiti, jer Evropska unija ima svoje probleme, ja sam zato tada zastupao stav da ona treba da bude primljena Evropsku uniju, a ne vjerujem da bi Bosna i Hercegovina sa svojim kapacitetom uopšte mogla da pravi bilo kakve probleme jednom ogromnom sistemu kao što je Evropska unija. To nije realno.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jelko. Thanks for putting it clear in this short time. And Christoph, please.
Difficult for a phrase of it to be short and clear. Of course, the integration to the European Union is a problem, and for Bosnia and for the European Union, and Yasmin put it right, so I have nothing to add. But there are the layers. There is the Council of Europe, there is the OSCE. Europe is not only the European Union, and so there should be a possibility, a strategy to let's say, to bring Bosnia, to make Bosnia stronger integrated in Europe. And this could be maybe possibly an alternative, and maybe, I put it again, to work not only at state level, because we are using the discourse of the nationalist. There are other levels who are more active. Cities, urban areas, regions that could maybe challenge, let's say, the messy situation that exists now, and different actors, not only civil society, NGOs, but trade unions, citizens, and they should become more active, and they have the power to change. I don't believe, I make it short really, I don't believe in the politics anymore, unfortunately, but in citizens, yes, and they can change the politics.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. Yeah, that was a good point to close the discussion. Bela is now closing our workshop. Just one sentence I would like to finish. Thanks to all of you for your contributions. I would like to have more of these workshops. As I suggested this workshop, I think it was an excellent idea to combine it with our with our issue of the SEER. But this discussion showed that we have much more to discuss, and we should do that in the framework of the ETUI workshops. Thanks a lot, Bela. You have the floor.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you to all of you for these valuable contributions and a good debate. Actually, I didn't want to make any closing words, but the way the discussion developed and how Yasmin was putting this absolutely dramatic kind of statement that the EU enlargement is over, it might be kind of logical to say, but it's still a shocking sentence. And I have to say that it's a shocking sentence in Brussels, and it's a shocking sentence in the region, both. So, I mean, and we have in the SEER Journal, we have a long history of writing and discussing about the integration perspectives of the Western Balkans, EU integration perspectives. And Christoph is actually the most prolific author on this single issue.
But I'm more and more despaired.
Thank you, but no, really, and really valuable contributions. So this is kind of the core thing, and it is very, so how we turn to this point at the end is very well showing what is at stake. and actually what probably the next discussion round will be about. At the same time, let me also recommend that we had an issue that was kind of synthesizing 20 years of SEER articles about, we had two topics. The one was the EU integration and the other one was migration. But on EU integration, we have this kind of synthesis volume that also shows how the whole perspective of EU enlargement or EU accession was changing over the 20 years. And this is what is happening now. It's even getting worse because both from the EU perspective, so Hungary, Orban, Poland, etc., and both from the region perspective. So it is very, very, very challenging. So finish with that, but certainly we will have further workshops on these, probably one on COVID as well, because with COVID, actually, we had two already important issues, all the repercussions, you know, but then certainly EU enlargement. Okay, so then thank you to everybody. Much appreciated. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Hmm.